ANZ Bank and the Commonwealth Bank of Australia, who have massive operations here in Australia, in Indonesia. And some of those same banks, for example, have operations in Fiji, Samoa, Tonga, and the Pacific, and across into the Indian Ocean and Papua New Guinea. So in the consultation process and the information process we went through, we had a look at what the member state submissions were to the Secretary General's high-level panel. And we had a look for consistent themes across each one of those areas. So was New Zealand saying the same as Australia? Was Australia saying the same as Indonesia? Was Indonesia saying the same as Papua New Guinea? Were they all saying relatively the same things as the small island developing states? And what that would mean in terms of Australian business and industry. Some common themes that we identified throughout this entire process was the fact that a range of different things were present. If I can get this thing to work. So the themes that came out for us were strengthening governance and capacity building, poverty eradication, sustainable agriculture, education, social inclusion, water security, women's empowerment, and importantly, and Jeffrey touched on it this morning, was Indigenous peoples. A lot of people may not know this, but Australia is home to the oldest continuously living population in the world, the Aboriginal people. I'm also a little bit different in the sense that I'm also Māori from New Zealand, so I myself am Indigenous, and I also chair Australia's Indigenous Chamber of Commerce. So I have much more detailed insight than most people. But Indigenous peoples is a common theme that doesn't just stretch through Australia and New Zealand and up here into Indonesia, Papua New Guinea and the small island developing states. It's also consistent with a lot of the things that are coming out of South America as well. So these are the things that we know to be true from our government submissions, and business and industry from Australia agrees with all of those things. We've also decided that, it's not our place to prioritise each one of these principal areas. It's up to nation states to do that, and you know what, they will without or with business participation in the process anyway. Our fundamental concern through all the member groups has been about inclusion, about the execution of the Sustainable Development Goals, whatever they may be. So from an Australian perspective, we've gone a little bit further. We've accepted that there will be SDGs. We've accepted that there probably will be crossover in some of the thematic areas from the MDGs into the SDGs. That's all very well known. So we don't want to muck around anymore. We want to start preparing for the implementation. So one of the things that we have had a look at is means of implementation and strengthening of institutions' ability to execute, implement, monitor and evaluate, the specific role of business and industry, and strengthening the reporting, monitoring and evaluation frameworks for business. Taking the last point first, there are too many reporting frameworks. We are interested in having a look at global integrated reporting. It makes sense that if business are truly going to participate, especially in the evaluation and monitoring process, there needs to be a consistent set of standards that enable business to report consistently. Currently, we have a range of different initiatives and reporting mechanisms from the GRI through to the PRI, the UNG communications, or UNGC communications of progress, etc. And you're not always submitting the same report once. You're submitting maybe 3 or 4 different versions of the report, or whatever the case may be. So we want to have a look at strengthening the ability to report and monitor, but we also want deeper integrity in institutions being able to monitor the performance of corporations and companies. At the moment, we don't see a lot of that happening. So if we're really going to be participants in the SDGs and to alleviate some of the concerns of civil society organisations, we need much more robust integrity in the evaluation and the monitoring system. And you know what, from a company's perspective, it's okay if you're not doing everything correctly. We need a combination of business leaders, as Jeffrey said this morning, who can guide and present solutions to companies who may be left wanting. The first point up there about means of implementation, we are also concerned that the UN system doesn't have the capacity to implement, execute and monitor. We need to strengthen the institutions of the UN system to enable the MDGs, the SDGs, whatever they may be, to be truly executable, not just talked about for another 10 or 15 years. The third thing we want to have a look at is the role of business and industry in partnership and collaboration with civil society. Now, I don't know how many conferences like this or like others that I've been to and business is still viewed with suspicion. The reality is that on the one hand, people want our money. On the other hand, they don't necessarily want us involved in how that money is spent. The other reality too is we have to be very careful as business and industry not to subjugate the responsibility of governments to also implement along the Millennium Development Goals SDGs. That's why we've also decided that a big one for us is along the lines of MDG number 8, which is a global partnership for development. It's been left hanging in the wind for quite a while, and our interest is in putting more robustness around that MDG to try and put together some kind of global initiative involving business and CSOs, the UN system and other institutions to really see how we can implement, execute and monitor. So aside from all of the other nuances around poverty, education, etc., the other thing I want to leave with you is simply this, and Jeffrey touched on it this morning, and I touch on it all the time, and that is the question of population. The only and single biggest discussion that is not being had today with the SDGs is that of population. The reality is, if you take Indonesia, for example, and 30 million more people move into the middle class, that's 30 million more people who will put additional pressure on natural resources, on infrastructure, on all sorts of different things. And it's the same that's happening in India, it's the same that's happening in China. We cannot have true sustainable development goals without first fostering and answering the question around the population. I won't go as far as Jeffrey and say that we need more family planning. It's a vexed issue. Different countries have different approaches and means of doing it. But one last thing I want to leave you with is to consider this. If we do, in fact, reach 10 billion people on the planet, it actually won't make a damn of difference what the Sustainable Development Goals or anything else are, because we will have an additional 1 to 2 billion people who will be consuming resources and food and water and energy and everything else that's imaginable. So we need to address the question of population for this to all truly work. And that's the view of Australia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matt. Thank you for raising an issue around population, which is not an issue that is often talked about